my name is Maya Sanchez and I'll be doing my YouTube presentation video about Latin American art, specifically in Peru, and involving the documents that was talked during this issue and the artwork to see how is it that they were connected. So I'll be talking about the writing from Jose Carlos Maria de Gui in his work The Problem of the Indian, and Martin Chambi's photography of Juan de la Suana. So a bit of background, again, this was happening in Peru, but specifically after the time of World War I, and the country as a whole was not doing well. They were affected from the war both politically and economically with their leaders, which their leaders were dictators, weren't making anything better. Instead, they were worsening the situation. So the Peruvians decided that they wanted to take a different route, and they started looking at other countries that were doing well even after being affected from World War I. And specifically, they looked towards European countries, and they wanted to apply that same formatted system / thinking that they had. Since it worked for them, they believe it should also work for Peru. But seeing this way of progressing to what they consider a quote-unquote new Peru, this involved having to get rid of the old, which by old it meant indigenous groups, because they saw them as they were holding this new Peru back because of their heritage, their more closeness to their culture, their color, and they were viewed as helpless, violent, and or impotent, which resulted to many of the indigenous Peruvians to be taken advantage and were really badly treated, especially with the subject of land. Now, all of these were negative connotations that weren't true, but many Peruvians, and when I'm talking about the other Peruvians, I meant these Peruvians who were living here. So we're living in this city, the more, I guess you can say, modern Peruvians. They saw this as just a slight hurdle, but once they got rid of, or at least silence or lessen the amount of indigenous Peruvians, this was just a small hurdle that will make them closer and closer to this goal of having the ideal European government, which is where the writing of Jose Carlos Maria de Gui, his work of The Problem with the Indian, steps in. He provides other perspectives of indigenous Peruvians, and he disagreed with this notion that they were an inconvenience to society, or thinking that if they applied this new European government system, that either way it's going to benefit both indigenous and modern Peru in the same way, and that will all work out, when in fact this will only benefit modern Peruvians and not at all indigenous Peruvians. And he explains why. So a lot of the modern Peruvians, they thought that, well, there's both issues with the land, and if we apply this system called nationalization, both indigenous Peruvians and us modern Peruvians will reach the same conclusion. We'll each get our rightful own of land and everything will work out. When in reality, again, this was not true. Because both of their lands were being taken by the government, but under nationalization, the government would take privately owned land for the government to own a public state, which this didn't involve nor protect nor do anything for any sort of land that was involved with the land tenure system. And the land tenure system affected indigenous people, yet not city or modern Peruvians. And the reason why was because a land tenure system was based on an agreement that indigenous people already had arranged with other indigenous groups. But there wasn't any legal based information, and by legal based there wasn't no physical evidence or physical documents. It was kept in an informal agreement so based of word of mouth, and they kept their word and promise. And this worked for them because they were a nomadic society. They would move and they would grow on the time. So they would just change it by meeting with the leaders, and they would keep their word and their promises. And that worked for them, but this didn't transpire for the current Peruvian government, which at the time they would override any of the land tenure system, saying that because there was no lack of agreement, that they wouldn't approve it. So they would agree with the land tenure system unless they wanted the land. And then they will say, well, since there was no physical evidence, there was no documentation, we can take this land. Or you don't have any proof with that, so we can do whatever we want. Even though they had previously stated that they were going to hold their word for it. So Maria de Gui, he knew this and said in his work, The Problem of the Indian, that regular laws would never work because they are based of a different system. Again, having nationalization and then trying to apply this to a land tenure system that was suited for a nomadic society versus a modern society, which were two different things, it wasn't going to work. Instead, he said that indigenous groups needed to rebel from this mistreatment and instead create a new system that let them be heard as individuals and be suited to address any issues that indigenous people felt needed to be talked about. And this idea was called indigenismo. So he felt that instead, indigenous group, something that would benefit both indigenous group and modern Peruvians, was combining the Inca social government, which is here on the left, right here, and Marxism, and this would help create a modern Peru that would suit for both modern Peruvians and indigenous Peruvians. And the artist Martin Chambi, which you can see his photograph, this is one of his examples of his work on the right side, he agreed with this notion of indigenismo, of taking pictures, and he showed that by taking pictures of Peruvian indigenous people and portraying them as actual peoples, not as stereotypes or characters. So just again, this is on the left side, the traditional Incan social group in Peru, and then on the right was at the time present day Peru of what remains from the Incas. So again, this here is Martin Chambi. On the left bottom side, that's the photographer, and then on the right, this is one of his pictures that will be talked about. Okay. So as noted before, the artist Martin Chambi, he took pictures of indigenous Peruvians and portrayed them as actual peoples, not as stereotypes or as characters that is stigmatized on his photos. So a lot of the times some other artists would claim that they were taking pictures of indigenous Peruvians, but it would just further this negative connotation or beliefs of, you know, that they were dumb, that they were violent, that they were stupid, that they were not smart. All these negative beliefs that again weren't true, they would pose that in their pictures to make the public agree with this. So Martin Chambi, he didn't do that. Instead, he showed who they were and treated them as people. And in this example of this photo of Juan de la Cruz Juana, that's his full name, the man on the right, that is his name. So he even titled this work after the man himself, giving him a sense of honor that he was able to own. And also, he stated his real name. He didn't change it to a European name or, you know, erase his identity. He allowed him to he gave him the opportunity to show him fully embracing his indigenous Peruvian identity. And also the way that he was posing and the way that he is dressed, it was compared to how European royal society would depict or show their rulers or prestigious noblemen, where they were dressed in their fine clothes, they had a nice robe, they had a nice crown. He was showing that indigenous Peruvians are also the same way too. They have that pride as well. It's just different clothing. And he gave them that same sense of honor. So here with Suana, that robe that European men were often displayed as royalty, he showed that that's the same thing, but it's with a poncho. Or with that crown or royal headdress that Europeans wore. It's the same thing too for indigenous Peruvians, but it's with a poncho, with a chulo hat. And he was showing that both the poncho and the chulo hat, that this is their true clothing, that this is who they are, and this is some proud identity that they have and that should be embraced. So overall, Martin Chambi and Jose Carlos Maria de Gui, they were having this strong point that rather than looking to other countries, specifically European countries, and trying to follow a system that may work for the European country, the answer to solve Peru's country situation in economical, political, social, all these issues that they have, they don't need to look elsewhere. The solution was within their country, because a solution for Peru would be found for Peru and be fit for Peru, not some other country. It wouldn't make sense. So instead, by combining both modern and ancient / indigenous Peruvian sense of government, it would be a melting pot that would suit both sides. And that would not only erase it would not erase Peruvians, but instead it would give them that equality and the rights that was lacking in this nationalization that the Peruvian government was trying to input, but instead would be a sense of acceptance for both modern and indigenous Peruvians, and it will allow them to live in harmony and progress, and it would still be a new Peru that both can live in harmony. So here are the resources that I use for my pictures, my information, and that is all. Thank you so much for listening.